this installment of Asian Business. We're going to start today with a guest speaker, our final guest speaker for this semester. I have the pleasure to announce to you our guest speaker today is Dr. Greg Story, who's the head of Carnegie training here in Japan. So let's give Greg a warm welcome to our classroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this talk about careers, talk about business in Japan, and some time at the end for questions. So please, if you've got some questions, think about those, and I'll cover those then. There's plenty of time for that. Basically, Florian is going to help me today to forward the slides. So I thought Florian's advice to me was talk a little bit about your own career and how you got to where you are today. Now, my example is a great example of career planning. Perfectly sequenced. Absolutely strategically planned from day one and moved all the way through very, very effectively. So you'll see this as a model for your own careers as you're developing your careers further. So let's go to the first one here. And this is an actor called Osei Koichi, and has played the part of Shintaro, who was the samurai. His ninja friend there is called Tombei the Mist. And about 1962-3 in Australia, first time we had Japanese TV programming. And I was a young boy, 10, 11 at that time. And this came on. It was unbelievably impactful for me. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today. Because my interest in Japan began with this, what we call a chanbara, typical chanbara, a sword drama in Japanese TV you see today, aimed at young kids. It was dubbed into English, and it was the most spectacular thing. It had a guide of westerns, Cisco Kid, Rifleman, all the classic American western dramas for children, and then the Vikings and William Tell, and then suddenly Shintaro and Tombei the Mist turn up. So younger people today have anime as a stimulation for interest in Japan. This is where I started. And that led to me getting into the martial arts and still training 46 years later. So that again was from that initial interest in Japan and coming through the ranks. I was competitive for many years, being a referee and official in many aspects. And happy to see my son on the left-hand side there, got his black belt last year, so nice to see that. And from that interest, I started training, but at the same time I started working. And my first career role was in sales, and I was a door-to-door encyclopedia salesperson. And what that meant was at about 6 o'clock, you were dropped off in an industrial suburb somewhere, generally low-income suburb somewhere, and you have to go and knock on each door. And you try to convince people who've got no money that they should buy this very expensive set of Encyclopedia Britannica for the kids' education. And I did that, and I was a total failure. As 16 years of age, I'd just finished high school, and I'd soon to turn 17, but as a 16-year-old door-to-door salesman in Britannica, it wasn't a great success. So I decided to step my career up a bit, and I went to the next one, which was pumping gas in a gas stand. And I did that for a little while, and the excitement got a bit too much for me working there. So I joined an insurance company. And it looked just like that, actually. The desks were laid out like that. It was a huge, big room. I did that for a couple of years. And I was training karate at the same time, so it worked in nicely for my interest. Found that, again, pretty exciting stuff, insurance. I don't know if you've ever worked in the insurance business, but very exciting stuff. So I decided, well, I just can't stand all this excitement. I better get something else happening here. So I became a builder's labourer, and I started working in construction, building large buildings, building houses at one stage there too. Did that for a little while. And then I decided to work in a factory. I worked in a factory. If anyone's read Chekhov, he had a book called My Universities. And it was actually not about university per se, it was about all the factories he worked in and the different jobs he had and how that educated him about life. This is a bit like that for me. This is my university, working in construction, working in factories, actually launching ships. I worked as what we call a painter and a docker in Australia. That means when ships come to port, people have to get the ship onto the harbour side and have to be painted. I was doing that. And this ship is actually being launched on rails, wooden rails coated in grease, coated in fat. And that's exactly what we did. We launched a ship just like that on these rails successfully. Didn't go plunk and fall over like sometimes they do. So did that for a while. And then worked in an abattoir as a day labourer. So you turn up in the morning, they have a look around, they say, okay, you, come on, everyone else go home. So did that for a while. Now this guy with the carcass here, he's actually an expert because he's cutting it up. I wasn't an expert. So my job was like this other guy here, picking it up and carrying it around as a labourer. So I did that for a while. And then I worked on railways. I worked as what we call a fettler. A fettler is what this guy's doing on the rails. So I did that for a little while as well. Again, everything you can see perfectly planned for my career. This is how you step forward. All strategized from the age of 16. This is what I'm going to do. You know. And then last job was working for the Ford assembly line in Brisbane on the line on what they call the wet deck, which is where you're actually buffering the cars. They've been painted, but they're getting a buffer before they get a final paint. Did that for a while. And then at the age of 21, university. So I'd worked for 4 years, putting my money together, going through Chekhov's universities in factories and the 3K in Japan, the Kikken, Kitane, Kitsui, the difficult, dirty and dangerous jobs, and then finally university, where I spent 14 years at university, continuously. Started in undergraduate, did an honours degree. We have a 3-year system in Australia plus honours year, 1 year. Came here as a Mombusho scholar, and that was another 2 years of Japanese language study, and then did a master's degree at Georgie, and then went home, started my PhD, and then spent about a year and a half preparing that. Came back here as a Japan Foundation Fellow to do my field work, and then went back to Australia and spent 5 years writing up my thesis. Now that was an interesting experience, and killed me, absolutely killed me. For the last 2 years, you're basically reading your own prose, and the most tortured gobbledygook sounds perfect to you, but anyone else reading cannot understand what the hell you're talking about. And I was doing Sino-Japanese relations, so I was looking at decision making on the Japanese side about economic assistance into China. And when I tell people that, and I say I was doing Japanese decision making, they burst into laughter usually, because if you've been involved with Japan for a while, you know that decision making is very opaque here. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So I did the PhD, thought I'd start teaching, and I'd teach Japanese politics and international relations, that type of thing. Around that time we had the bubble going on in Japan, my phone was ringing off the hook, and I had a lot of people ring me up say, you know, Greg, we want to buy this from Japan, or we want to sell this to Japan. So I thought, right, I'll set up my own little consulting company here and I'll go back and teach at university later. Never made it back. I'm still waiting to go back and teach. So I came out of university life, went into business as a consultant, did that for a while, and then I got into a company which is now called Jones Lang LaSalle. It was called Jones Lang Wooten in those days, a very big national real estate company, and I was on the Japan desk in that company, and the idea was to sell commercial products like buildings, golf courses, five-star hotels, shopping malls, big stuff to Japanese buyers. Now, that would have to be the worst company name you could possibly come up with to be selling to Japanese. So imagine this scenario. I want to come to Japan, meet companies. I don't know anybody, so I'm cold calling Japan. Cold calling Japan. And I ring up and I say, "Kochira wa Jones Lang Wooten no Greg story de gozaimasu." Hello, this is Greg's story from Jones Lang Wooten. Now you're picking up the phone and suddenly you've got a foreigner speaking Japanese and it's all katakana. You know, Jones Lang Wooten no Greg story de gozaimasu, all katakana. And so the first reaction you would get would be, "Eh?" in typically Japanese polite form. And then you'd have to explain to someone who you were. And normally you've got, in those days anyway, the OL, the office lady, would pick up the phone and she would say, "1 moment please." And then you'd get the, most dweeby, pimply, youngest guy in the section, because I have to go to the next lowest level male. And he'd get the phone, and I'd go through the whole thing again, explaining what I want. He'd say, wait a moment. And finally, you might get to someone like the Kacho or someone a bit higher. And out of pure sympathy, they would agree to see me on my trip to Japan. I'd come and I'd try and explain what we had in terms of products. And this is sort of at the end of the bubble, actually. The bubble had actually peaked, and we were in the sort of downturn, but no one knew it at that time. Did manage to sell some properties, but it was hard going, very hard going. And my Japanese wasn't anywhere near as good as it is today in those days. And so I did that for about 4 years. And then I got into international trade. I applied for a job to set up a brand new operation in Japan. Now, this is back in the early 90s. The number of Australians who would have had that experience to start something from nothing, set it up from nothing in Japan, you could probably count them on one hand in those days. Even now, it wouldn't be many. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity. I'll come back to Japan. I'll learn a lot of things. So I managed to get that job, and I opened an office in Nagoya. Now, I lived in Tokyo previously as a student, so I understood Tokyo. I didn't know the rest of Japan. And when I was living in Tokyo, I thought that Tokyo equaled Japan. When I lived in Nagoya, I realized Tokyo is Tokyo, and Japan is Japan, and they're not the same thing. And Nagoya was tough. Anyone here from Nagoya? Anyone here from that Chiba region? No? Anyone doing business with Nagoya? Okay, very tough. Do you know the word sakoku jidai, the closed country mentality of Japan during the Bakufu era prior to Meiji? That's Nagoya still. Very, very conservative, very parochial, very regional. Even for Japanese who come from outside of Tokyo, outside of Nagoya to work there, they're not accepted. Just not accepted because you're not from that region. The people who work in those companies graduated from universities there. It's a very closed world. So as me, as a foreigner, trying to introduce Australian products and services into that market was tough. Had some success, it was hard. And then I ran our operation in Osaka, which is much easier. Anyone here from Kansai? Any Kansai Jin here? No? The beauty about Osaka is yes, no, very clearly, very quickly. In Nagoya, it's very simple. The answer is always no. But at least in Osaka, it's a yes or a no, and they'll tell you straight away. Tokyo, it's a definite maybe. Most of the time. You're never quite sure if it's a yes or a no. But Osaka, yes, no. They're very businesslike. And that was refreshing from having worked in Nagoya. It was like that. And then I came back to Tokyo and I ran the operation in Tokyo, became a country head for Japan. And then I had a career change to retail banking. And I joined the Shinsei Retail Bank. This is around about 2001, which was a very exciting period of time. The long-term credit bank had gone bankrupt. They brought in foreign management to turn the bank into a different type of bank, a retail bank. Very exciting, enjoyed that. Wound up becoming the country head for the National Australia Bank, which is a big, massive organisation, 40,000 people around the world. Ran Japan operation for them for 3 years. That just about killed me because we went through Lehman shock, and that changed the whole banking world. We now had credit and risk covering everything, so it was very hard to get things through the system. It was very hard to take any initiative. It was tough. The market was tough. And then, as a natural, logical consequence of all of those things, I came to Dale Carnegie, which is a corporate training company. It's a 105-year-old company, founded by Dale Carnegie. His daughters own the company today. And this is all around a number of things: leadership, communication skills, presentation training, sales. These are sort of some core areas we do. And it's been very successful. It's training 90% of the Fortune 500 companies. Now, if you think about it, Fortune 500 companies are the richest, most powerful companies in the world. They can afford anybody. They only want the best. And we train 90% of those guys. So that says something about the quality. In Japan, we've been here for 54 years. And that's very important because often with Japanese buyers, they think, oh, this is American, it won't work in Japan. You say, well, that may be the case in some products or services, but we've been here 54 years, totally localized now, so that's not an issue for us. Okay? So that's very important. So credibility Warren Buffett. Anyone heard of Warren Buffett? Yeah. Most successful business person probably ever. Probably one of the most successful business people ever. And certainly the most successful investor ever. He is a massive fan of Dale Carnegie. And this was a takeout from CBS News. Doesn't matter which documentary you pick. In fact, there's a new one on Warren Buffett's just come out. Every time he says, on my wall in my office in Omaha, I don't have my university or master's graduation certificates, I have my Dale Carnegie certificate, because this changed my life. Now, if you're in business and you want a credibility statement, and you want a testimonial, how would you like to have Warren Buffett, the most famous, most successful investor on the planet, say your product or service changed his life? That's pretty good, isn't it? And that's what he says. We don't pay Warren Buffett anything because, well, we can't afford Warren Buffett. Imagine what he's worth. And he only ever gives testimonials for his own companies that he owns, except for Dale Carnegie. He says that every time. So very popular there. And in Japan, Murakami-san Norio, he's very well known amongst the Japanese business community. He was the chairman of Google at one stage, many things. Very big fan of Dale Carnegie. Did Dale Carnegie training in his 30s. And then that again changed his life and changed his career path. And again, a very, very big fan. So again, looking for credibility on the Japanese side. Just hit one more there for me, please. Yeah, thank you. So we're in 100 countries around the world, teaching 30 languages. Now, this is about Asian business. So we are right through Asia. The only country we're not in is North Korea. And we're unlikely to ever be in North Korea, I think, unless something dramatically different changes there. But what that means, though, is that we are testing our product across the globe. Every second of the day, somewhere, someone is teaching a Dale Carnegie course, getting feedback from the participants, getting feedback from clients about their needs. That is a tremendous asset in business, to be able to have that touch point, that antennae, global. Because when you're talking to people in Japan, you talk about trends. This is what's happening in America. This is what's happening in Europe. This is what's happening in the rest of Asia. This is where you fit into the world. This is what we've seen work somewhere else. This is what's been fantastically successful for these particular industries that you're in other countries. Very good for referencing what's going on there. And this is one of Dale Carnegie's principles. There's 30 principles of human relations. This is number one. It's the only negative one. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. When you read his principles, they're very, very simple. They're very, very simple, but not easy to do. Okay. So, this is from our YouTube channel. We were just chatting earlier before. We've got nearly 500 videos on YouTube. They're all free. We're trying to promote Dale Carnegie. So I use YouTube a lot, putting up how-to videos, how to do this, how to do that. It's free. It's on our website. Please access that. And it's all there for you. We use podcasts. I do 3 podcasts every week, which I can tell you is a lot. It's very demanding. But again, we're doing content marketing, so we're trying to get the message out. We do a lot on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And go to the next one you see here. There's, 7,300 followers on LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn every day. I post in Japanese and I post in English every single day. And so now, what do we got here? 460 articles on LinkedIn. So if you go to my LinkedIn page, and you should do that, there's 460. There's an archive of 460 articles that are about 600, 700, 800 words long. It's all straight business. It's all on different topics. And you'll see that there. So that might be advantageous for you to see what's current in business, what are the issues facing business people. I try to address those in those particular articles that I'm writing.